This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, a summit of world leaders in Ukraine, a German election result, which I think rightly is being reported as much about who came second as who came first. I think if you're talking about the far right and you're talking about Germany, then the electoral arithmetic is a little bit different to what it might be elsewhere. I think we're probably, by the time I get to the end of this introduction, I think we're probably going to be asking what the phrase far right means to you, actually, which wasn't my intention when I walked downstairs a moment ago. Sometimes my thoughts are still crystallizing as I make my way into the studio. Sometimes, as you know, it's during the news bulletin that I settle upon what I actually want to talk about. And sometimes I start an introduction about one thing and end up finishing it about something completely different before throwing open the phone lines to you. But I'm struck by a couple of things. The first, I wish, was a joke. So I caught myself just before coming downstairs, noting that we are reporting in quite a lot of detail, possibly more detail than we have done in the past, on foreign elections. Most obviously, the United States and Germany. And in some ways, the reason for that is the same. This has only just occurred to me. And the reason for that is on both occasions, the success of Nazi-sympathetic political movements. Now, I wish I was exaggerating. In the case of the AfD, I am obviously not. The Alternative for Germany party is rooted in the ashes of the Nazis. Some of its most senior members have spoken about the need to move on. One of them has been fined a couple of times for deploying a phrase that is illegal, a slogan of the Nazi stormtroopers. And we saw a crowd where the fact that the first word of that slogan, Alles, is very similar to the name of the leader, Alice, where most people thought the crowd was sort of smuggling in a little nod of approval towards their Nazi legacy. And again, calls for a 180-degree turn in how it remembers our past, condemning of the monument in the middle of the capital, which commemorates the Holocaust, describing it as a monument of shame. You've got a former party leader and current member of parliament who's engaged in Holocaust trivialization on several occasions. Hitler and the Nazis are just a speck of bird poop in more than 1,000 years of successful German history, he said. And it goes on. And there is absolutely no doubt where they come from and what they stand for. Nor was there, of course, when Nigel Farage went over there to deliver a speech to the party a few years ago. But the French far-right leader, and when I say far-right, these are phrases that nobody seems to disagree with. There's some dispute here over whether or not such a phrase should apply to someone like Liz Truss or Nigel Farage, even as they dance around the conference where all these far-right leaders are coalescing. But the French far-right leader, and I don't know whether you saw this or not, has pulled out of this conference in America. I think it's called the CPAC conference, after Steve Bannon gave what was, I think, pretty obviously a kind of half-hearted Nazi salute. I saw it described by somebody as the kind of Nazi salute you give when you're not rich enough to sue everybody who calls it a Nazi salute. It was by no means as full-throated as Elon Musk's chest-thumping. I think there's no other phrase for it, is there? But so you can say, these bloody liberals, these muesli-munching liberals worried about Nazis calling everyone a fascist. You've actually got Jordan Bardella, the leader of the Le Pen's party, the party that both Le Pen's previously led, pulling out of a conference after Steve Bannon, jailbird and fraudster, gave it at this conference and then afterwards was warmly greeted by Nigel Farage. So, the confusion about what this phrase means is huge, right? You've got someone widely regarded as a far-right leader in France. Even the BBC call him far-right, and goodness knows how scared they are of calling a spade a spade. The French far-right leader, Jordan Bardella, has cancelled a speech after President Trump's former top advisor made a hand gesture, and here comes BBC, ease that some likened to a Nazi salute. Well, he did. He thought it was, so he can't go. It occurred to me that the Nazi legacy in Germany and the Nazi legacy in France will be two very different things, because one is a sort of vanquished master race narrative, and the other is an oppressed and occupied country. So you'd probably struggle to be Nazi sympathetic in France more than you would in Germany. But I do have some insights. I don't have the full grasp of the facts. I'm not even sure whether anybody does. So, and then you've got the British politicians turning up at this conference in the United States with massive, great, cheesy grins on their face, as people like Bannon do things like Nazi salutes. So the Germany element is obviously at the top of our list this morning. I don't know if you've seen any of the demographic breakdowns. There's some interesting. Probably the least interesting element of it is age-related, oddly. There's a bit of generational difference. I think older people are less likely to be comfortable with some of the neo-Nazi associations of the party that's come second in the German elections. Big breakdown according to gender. Women tacking now to the left a lot more than you'd expect. But the really big one is East-West. The former East Germany is incredibly more sympathetic to the rhetoric of the far-right party, the fascistic AfD, than residents of the former West Germany. In fact, when you look at a colour map of how the party vote breaks down, it's almost like that time I told you about in Australia when there were some forest fires, and I looked up from the beach and someone had drawn a straight line down the middle of the sky with smoke on one side and blue Bondi beauty on the other side. It's incredible. But they all have this single phrase in common. The way the AfD talked today about Muslims is very similar to how their forebears in the actual Nazi party talked about Jews. And don't forget, you hear people celebrating what's happened to the AfD in Germany by saying, they're not the elites and immigration, and then it's exactly how the actual Nazis, the original Nazis, spoke about Jews, up to and including the British media, which was neck deep by the end of the 1930s in warnings of floods of people coming in. And I've got two areas of interest on this. One, inspired by that demographic divide down the middle of Germany. I don't want to start every week with a reference to the historian Francis Fukuyama and his rather busted flush of a theory that history ended effectively when the Berlin Wall came down. But I was still a kid when the Berlin Wall came down. I thought everybody celebrated. I thought everyone in East Germany was going, we're free! We're free! Maybe they were. But they seem to be nostalgic now, not only for the Nazi party, but also for the Russian, it's not quite an occupation, is it? But for the Soviet era as well. They're much poorer than their Western counterparts. Whether or not German politicians could have done more to improve the economic fortunes in the East, I do not know. But they're much poorer than their Western counterparts in general, and much, much, much more likely to vote for a far-right party with its roots very much in the Nazi movement. So I got a lot of German listeners. I got a lot of listeners in Germany, a lot of listeners in other countries who are German or who have links to Germany. I don't want to confine the conversation exclusively to them. I want instead to wonder whether there is anything else in play here. Looking specifically at the German election result, and it's a right-wing party that's won, and it's a very, very right-wing party that's come second. And I just want you to tell me whether the AfD offers anything to its supporters other than the comforting explanation that the reason why you're poor and unhappy is because of all the immigration. The way it was reported over here was twofold. It was the economy and immigration. The elephant in the room, not just in Germany, but in this country as well, is that increasing economic growth while reducing immigration is, I suspect, impossible. But let's say, if not impossible, then improbable. So that absolute imbalance in attention. We need to improve economic growth, but we also need to reduce immigration. The AFD goes further, I think, and describes Muslims as a threat to the country. Promises in some, I don't know whether it was in this manifesto, but certainly a few years ago, it was promising to deport people who'd done absolutely nothing wrong. German citizens of non-ethnic German heritage could face deportation. So, I mean, it's really, really, really horrible. But it's popular, and that's why you can't ignore it. Popular stroke populist. What else do they offer? So you need a little bit more knowledge of German politics than I have to answer this. Do they offer anything else? Is this, because looking at that East-West divide, that simple narrative of the reason why your life is not what you want it to be is all the fault of foreigners. Is it just that? Is it that simple? Is that all that they offer? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And if you're, going to send me messages, here's one from Alec. Look at the state of Germany as a result of mass immigration. Open your eyes. Well, Germany, like a lot of other areas in that kind of context, proves the opposite of what you think it proves. So the former East Germany has much lower immigration than the former West Germany, and yet it's much easier to persuade people that all their woes are caused by immigration. Listen, I'm not going to put Alec in idiot's corner because, he could be a comment writer on the Daily Telegraph or a senior member of the Conservative Party. That's the cold fact, is for all the Twitter accounts dedicated to persuading people that all people of colour are criminals, the simple facts of the matter are that spooking people about immigration is a hell of a lot easier where they have much, much less personal experience of it. That's why a crime committed by an immigrant will have the word immigrant in 10-foot letters in the headline, whereas a crime committed, the massive majority of crimes committed not by immigrants will never be reported in that way. So that's what I want to know in the first instance. With the specific response to Germany, two questions. Why are they so popular in the former East? 0345 6060 973. Why are they so popular in the former East Germany? And what does the AFD offer except the comforting lie that the reason why your life is not what you want it to be is because of immigration, and therefore by threatening to deport non-ethnic Germans we will somehow improve your life? What else do they represent? Because the question I'm not going to do today, the question that I even on an overthinking Monday, I'm a little bit cowed by, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by this question, but I think we need to start thinking about it. If as most coverage contends, the only way to stop these far-right parties, these fascistic movements, is to bring about major economic growth. What happens if there's no major economic growth? What happens if major economic growth is impossible? There's another story today that we may move on to about the skills shortage, which is, of course, intrinsically linked to immigration, which kind of proves my point. We need 25,000 bricklayers, 10,000 carpenters, 4,000 plasterers, God knows how many more skilled tradespeople to even begin to come close to delivering Labour's promise for 1.5 million new homes, which means it's probably not going to happen. So what if there is no economic uptick? What if it's actually impossible? In a world of finite resources, infinite growth has always looked a little bit impossible. Maybe we've reached that point. And the parties promising to improve your life by removing or reducing foreigners benefit from the absence of economic improvement. What actually happens then? Because they've got much less chance of delivering economic improvement than politicians who don't rely on racist lies to get ahead. If they are racist lies, we're about to find out. Maybe they're not. Then I need to know. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So 3 ways into it. The first is What do they offer? What does this neo-Nazi movement in Germany offer to its voters apart from racism? Well, or immigrant blaming. Let's call it that. Let's be a bit kinder, okay? Question number 2, why are they so much more popular in East Germany than West Germany? 0345 6060 973. And we won't do that third question today, but we may, depending on what your appetite is for discussing the minutiae of German politics, we may have a look at what the phrase far right even means to you in this context. Because these splits and splinters are absolutely fascinating. We're in a situation now where the far-right leader, the leader of the French far-right party, is less comfortable knocking about with the fraudster and former prisoner Steve Bannon because of the Nazi-looking salute that he gave. The leader of the French far-right party professes to be disgusted by that, while Liz Truss and Nigel Farage are dancing around American stages holding his hands, metaphorically speaking. So what does far right even mean? Because Farage would probably deny that he was and agree that the French leader was. So where does that leave? Well, you tell me. 10:18 is the time. Phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 10. I mean, look, it makes me a bit antsy at first glance because they all do it, and that actually calms me down. It's not just papers that lean very heavily in one direction that report these election results in Germany with what seems to me to be a degree of triumphalism. But I think that's my problem. Hard right on course for big gains in Germany. Whenever do you put the people who came second in the headline? You know, if it was the Olympics, would the silver medal? How often would the silver medalist get the headline? Conservatives set to lead German coalition as far-right party surges is probably a better way of putting it. But Rupert Murdoch's Times goes for hard right on course for big gains in Germany. But I think that it's unique, right, in the context of modern Europe. If a party that has risen from the ashes of the Nazis has done very well, twice as well as it did last time, in a German election, that's an international story on a scale that often election results in other countries are not. 22 after 10. So what do they offer? This party that has been formed from the ashes of the Nazis, what do they offer apart from the same rhetoric about immigrants and Muslims that their precursors in the original Nazi party offered about Jews and gypsies? What else do they offer? 0345 6060 973 or Roma, who of course have that word for the Holocaust, parasmos, which best translates as the devouring. The first time I read that translation, I shivered. And you know what? I still do. Jerry is in Ironbridge in Telford. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Hi, Jess. Thanks for having me on. Originally, I'm from Czech Republic, so view of many still very big Eastern Bloc.
Yes.
So I have a view on the division between the East and West Germany and why actually such a massive proportion of East Germans voted for the right wings.
Yes.
Because I'm having this conversation with my friends all over the Czech. I'm nearly 50 years old, and I can't believe the view is still the same. Effectively, during the communism period, which was over 40 years in the Eastern Bloc, no one, and I mean no one, has ever emigrated into those countries. The people were emigrated out, loads of people, including my family. My great-great-grandfather has to emigrate to America because of the potential persecution from communism. And for those people and even their kids and the generation still coming in, emigration, the people, someone from elsewhere coming over, it's something unbearable. They just cannot comprehend what is going on, why the people would ever come. And one of an example, which was scary for me, when my cousin came over to visit me in Britain, and she's a clever girl.
Yeah.
But on the airport, first time she saw a lady wear a burqa, and she looked at me and said, "Look at this, isn't that scary?" And I thought, what are you talking about? And that view, that was the light bulb moment for me. And I thought, well, you're over 50 and you still don't get it. So those people living effectively, Iron Curtain has been down for over 30 years. Very early on, I would say 10, 15 years, there was a big spike of kind of emotions, and we open the world and everything is fantastic. There is the West, there is the East. We don't really care because everything is going to be bright and perfect. But unfortunately, the decline, and that's what they see since Brexit, actually, and Brexit and Trump allows us to see the lies. Therefore, the other question of yours is, well, what the oppositions can do better. I don't think they can do much.
Nor do I. This is the really this is the pessimistic moment. So, in many ways, the argument about immigration has been lost. They've surrendered to. I mean, you look at the Keir Starmer in this country, arguably has surrendered as well. They insist that we need economic growth to improve the lot of ordinary people, while doing everything they can to cut off the flow of labour that is absolutely intrinsic to the improvement in economic growth. So, God knows what's on the horizon, and I don't think today is necessarily the day to examine it. But what do you think Merz is going to do? What do you think the new fella in Germany is going to do?
I think it's going to be what Nigel would do in here, and that's actually still spelling the propaganda and nonsensical lies and the feed the beast. And it's up to the in brackets, not in brackets, but the sensible people try to fight it. But since all these lies, and particularly the Brexit and first Trump winning, it's extremely hard to actually articulate the truth. And
what about the Holocaust? The thing about the ADF, my introduction to it really were the comments by one of the founders, the AfD, I beg your pardon, one of the founders of the party, and I think a former leader, talking about Hitler and the Nazis just being his phrase, I don't know how it translates, a speck of bird poop in more than 1,000 years of German history. A judge ruled that he could be described, a German judge ruled he could be described as a fascist without any fear of a defamation suit because such a description was a, quotes, value judgment based on facts. We know there have been threats to deport German citizens, remember, citizens of non-ethnic German heritage. And crucially, the idea that the Holocaust should be something that Germans stop feeling sorry about and stop feeling shame for, and they should undertake, this is a different one, this is a leader of the party in one of the states in Thuringia, talked about how they need to take a 180-degree turn on how Germany currently atones for Nazi crimes. So why does that land in East Germany in a way that most people, if they actually had been paying attention instead of just reaching for lazy claims about elites and immigration, most people would be chilled by the idea that a party that minimises or denies the Holocaust is really, really popular in East Germany?
I think there is quite big distinctions what the voters of the right-wing view is. Most of them, and I really believe that, even my friends and what I know the thing from the East, they would never vote for Nazi itself. They really, really, really hate what they did. But the problem is the similar denial when someone said about the truth, oh, he's Nazi. And it's so easy to dismantle it. I said, oh, well, because you mark him that, it's exactly opposite. What they think in terms of the right thing, they don't want for Nazi. They don't want the what happened in Holocaust.
So we don't want a Holocaust. We just want to deport them all.
Exactly.
So we don't want the gas chambers. We just want the expulsion of our fellow citizens for being the wrong kind of German.
Mild version of we don't need these people. And the main reason is, and now we go into the economics, because it's very simple link between I can't afford whatever electricity bills and etc. Versus, well, there is too many immigrants, and so loads of communications with people I know from the East Bloc is, well, A, it's like here, it's too many of them.
Yes.
B, look at the crime, exactly your yes. description was the massive title as long as it's immigrant. So those is just a feed, and the people really kind of scared of immigration.
And you lap it up because, of course, what you're really troubled by is foreignness or darker skin. But of course, if you pretend that it's about crime or terrorism, then you get to call for the deportation of everybody who you don't like the look of, because some people who look a bit more like them than look like you have committed some crimes. Imagine if we carried that into every area of life. Imagine if we started punishing all white people for the crimes of white people, or all indigenous Brits for the crime of indigenous Brits. And the levels of stupidity on display are spectacular. Here's a text. How would you know what it feels like to lose your country? Does your family tree stretch back over 5 centuries in one country, or are you from an Irish immigrant family? So there you have an English racist trying to lecture Irish people on not knowing what it's like to lose their country to what? Colonise? Mate, you're talking about tourism. You want to talk about colonisation, then read a bloody book, honestly. It's quite incredible. And for the record, I haven't lost my country. I live here. I stick my head out the window and have a look at what's going on. You spend your life on Twitter looking at unsourced footage and violence, then of course you're going to be able to persuade yourself that you're some sort of victim. But victim of what exactly? To which the answer would be, from a texter like that, a victim of foreignness, which brings us back to what the AFD offer. Do they offer anything else than a narrative of victimhood, where what you are a victim of is too many foreigners? And what removing them would fix doesn't matter, because what you're appealing to is my hatred of the other. Or is that unfair? And the AFD actually offer a much more sophisticated political package. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. Two interesting things to tell you before we go back to the phones. The first is that question. It fascinates me. How do you think your life will improve if they start deporting people, if they start deporting German citizens? This has been a pledge that AFD leaders have made in the past. Non-ethnic German citizens, as in German citizens of non-ethnic German heritage. And I always think, and I shared this with you not long ago, I always think of what my friend Lily told me about her family. Her father and her brother were taken to the gas chambers, but it didn't happen overnight, and it was the superintendent in the building where she lived that she used to tell the story most powerfully. And one day he was wearing her father's watch. So you say to someone in 1930s Germany, or Lviv actually, I think it was, in Poland at the time, you say to someone then, what is it? How is your life actually going to improve if they start remigration, or they start undoing whatever word you're using to describe your racism, to disguise your racism? And that's the answer, isn't it? You sit here being all academic about it. You ask that man, how's your life going to improve when they start persecuting the Jews, or when they start persecuting the German citizens of non-ethnic German heritage, which is the same thing? How's your life going to improve? And he would just say, I will have that Jew's watch. That's how my life will improve. So how does the life of an unemployed person in East Germany improve when they start these policies? I will have that Jew's watch. I don't know. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe there is a much more sophisticated analysis of how, at a time when economic growth is essential, reducing the population of working-age people is a good idea. And then, in the context of Idiot's Corner, it's not just Idiot's Corner, is it? Because in many ways, Idiot's Corner's in the White House now. So having a look at the radicalised online right, as it is best understood, or the radicalised online far right, we should start now using Idiot's Corner to find out what talking points are gaining traction there. I probably shouldn't give it away by explaining what I'm going to do, because you might stop showing me. But I'm going to work on the principle that you're too stupid to realise that you're giving the game away. So here's John, who writes, I have read that the German government are hoping for Starmer to introduce the EU youth mobility scheme. Then they will use it to deport all their unwanted immigrants here. Best regards, John. Now, I thought that might be a joke, taking the mickey out of far-right talking points, but luckily I have a history function on my screen that I discovered about 20 years after starting the job, and I can look at what other messages people have sent into the studio. And John sends that in several times a day to all the presenters on the station. And that is obviously something that's culled from the radicalised online far right. So, I mean, just briefly, a freedom of movement scheme is the intellectual and physical opposite of a deportation scheme. I don't know how stupid you have to be to think that a freedom of movement scheme for youths or young people between countries, wait until you see the size of the one that we've already got with loads of other countries, would somehow allow Germans to deport unwanted immigrants to this country. It's a level of stupidity born of a bigotry that is the biggest part of your personality. You cannot believe something like that unless you really, really want to. You know? It's why it's the same personality type that is likely to send their life savings to a scammer in St. Petersburg on the promise of receiving £100 million in gold bullion by return of post. You have to want to believe something so badly that you ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. So there's the latest talking point that you will no doubt be hearing in a Question Time edition or a Daily Telegraph opinion column sometime soon. The German government is going to use the freedom of movement for young people, the youth mobility scheme, to send all its unwanted immigrants here. And how does that land on your Auntie Doris's Facebook page? You don't even need to speculate, do you? Jackie is in Stuttgart. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello, Jackie.
How are you? Yeah, I'm not happy with the election result, got to be honest. It scares me how popular the AfD have shown themselves to be. But I was saying to your producer, my husband was very, very sort of cool about it. I was getting really quite upset, but he said, if they did get into power, let them, because then they will be left completely exposed and you'll see that they have absolutely nothing to offer other than outright racism. They really don't have anything. And I think one of the reasons that they've become so popular over in East Germany is people think that the reunified Germany is really reunified, and it isn't. East Germany is still, or the former East Germany, it's not at the same economic level as the rest of Germany. It just isn't. It's been let down over the last nearly 40 years. There hasn't been the investment in housing and infrastructure. And what they're seeing is millions and millions and millions of euros being pumped into helping refugees while they're still not getting their share.
Sounds familiar.
And that's been a mistake. Yeah, it's exactly the same as in the UK. And it's the same all over Germany. When you're struggling to make ends meet, when you're struggling to pay your bills every month, and you see and you're told on...
Well, it's an unleavened diet. Every single day. Look, we found someone with a hotel room. We found someone with a... And then, of course, even the truth isn't enough. Then they start making stuff up about they get given cars and they get given this. Then you're going to bite, aren't you?
They're all living in the best accommodation, and they've all got the latest Apple phones. And it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. But I mean, there is a problem. There is a problem because we see this New Year girls being assaulted by immigrants, by Syrians, and this business with cars being driven into people at Christmas, and just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, the last one, or the one before the last one, was an Islamophobic attack. I mean, it was a protest at the number of Muslims coming to the...
That hasn't been made nearly as big a deal out of as the last one. Oh, God, it was an Afghan... Somebody had their immigration refused. The same tactics that are being used in the UK, the same tactics that are being used in America...
I remember you mentioned the United States, and I remember, I think it was one of Donald Trump's idiot sons who talked about M&Ms and said if one yellow M&M is poisonous, then you'd remove all the yellow M&Ms from the bowl. And it was a while ago. And that is what they mean, isn't it? So, but then why doesn't that apply to criminals of a different background? Why aren't we going to punish everybody who looks like me? Why aren't we going to punish all radio presenters for the depravity of Jimmy Savile?
I'm not an ethnic German. I'm white. I have dual nationality.
You'd be all right, I reckon, wouldn't you? Under this rule.
You know what? Funnily enough, I think I'd probably be okay.
You're not Jewish, are you?
I'm not Jewish. No. I might at some point in the future decide to become religious and follow Islam. Yeah. That might put a different slant on it. And
then you'd be on the list. So I mean,
I get into arguments even with family when this anti-immigrant narrative it's really insidious and pervasive, and it's creeping into people. And I have to say to my in-laws, my friends, I'm an immigrant. When you talk about all immigrants, you're talking about me. as well.
But they're not. They don't mean you.
But no, they absolutely don't mean me. John, you know that's not what I mean. I said, well, it is what you mean, though.
That was Brexit. It was the first line, the first morning after Brexit, people ringing me up to tell me their mother-in-law was telling them, I voted to get rid of all the immigrants. That's me, Mum. No, I didn't mean you. I don't mean you. The problem here, and I worry about articulating this too often because I think I'd turn myself off. The problem here is that the idea of a massive economic uptick anytime soon is pie in the sky. The idea of a reindustrialization, and if you look at the west of Germany, you'll know more about this than I do in Stuttgart, it is the form of big industrial areas where the AfD is making the biggest gains in West Germany for the same reasons that big industrial areas were pro-Brexit in this country. They're nostalgic for a past that's not retainable, but they believe that it is. You kind of worry about what happens next. If this is the only thing people are being offered, look, the country is declining. My life is not what I want it to be. The richest people in the world are getting richer and richer and richer, but they also own the media now. So, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. So we're not going to be reading about why that's unfair. All we're ever going to be reading about is why we're spending it all on immigrants.
Yeah.
And then what happens? What happens when they're in charge?
Yeah, there's nothing. Where we are here, we're very close to Daimler, who is a huge employer.
Yeah.
But they've been taking a hit from the whole electronic cars market. And that's not the fault of Ali next door, who's come over from Syria 5 years ago. It's not his fault. It's just a changing world. And we're struggling, I think, to keep up with how everything's changing. We've got more and more things like AI are going to have a really big effect. And that's where people are losing work.
And then you start wondering what it is that is motivating all these absurdly wealthy people. We're richer than, pretty much anyone since medieval times to start seeking to control even further the means of mass communication. And you kind of realize that those terrible things that happen in history happen with the connivance and the active enthusiasm of certain parts of the population. So it's not that big a mystery. If people, when they knew what was going on in the 1930s and the 1940s in Germany, were cool with it, got this slightly naive view that everyone was secretly opposed to it, then it's not that surprising that 80 years later, people would be enthusiastic about the idea of a return to some of the policies. Jackie, thank you. 10:45 is the time. And that's the point, isn't it? So we're moving now, rhetorically, to the point where no one argues about it anymore. So it's like that texter earlier. You don't know what it's like to lose your country. You can't trace your family tree back 500 years. And it's gibberish, obviously gibberish, but it's sincere gibberish, if you understand what I mean by that. He believes that something's been stolen from him every time he sees a black man in the street or every time he sees a Jewish woman on the tube. He believes that something's been stolen from him, and they appeal to that by saying, yes, it has been stolen from you. And you can't really push back against that with a promise of economic improvement unless the economic improvement is guaranteed. So the conversation it's not going to be denied anymore. The claim is going to be, if you're listening to a program like this from a position of sympathy for the far right in the United States or in Germany or in France or in the United Kingdom, goodness knows we've got our own little pound shop versions coming out of the woodwork all the time. But that's going to be the point. So no, we really are being stolen. We really are under siege. We really are. Our country really is. And you ask for evidence and they'll point you back to Facebook and Twitter. Or crimes committed by people of a certain ethnicity that have no more to do with all the other people of the same ethnicity than the crimes committed by people of my ethnicity have to do with me, or the crimes committed by people of your ethnicity have to do with you. But it's all there. And it's literally written down. And yet, as it unfolds once again in real time, lots of people are either feigning ignorance or joining in. But that's the next bit of the conversation, and we're probably there already, in that we start describing the racist lies as legitimate concerns. You don't know what it's like to be poor. I said, well, no, but you don't know what it's like to be black. You can work it out and decide who's to blame for the way that people are treated. And it's hardly ever going to be each other's fault. It's almost always going to be the fault of the people upstairs, the fault of the people with much more. 10:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. My country was stolen by the Normans. Send them all back now. I don't know if we can joke about this stuff when you see some of the stuff that's popping up with the radicalised online right. They will believe absolutely anything. I read you the message from John earlier saying that the only reason why the German government might sign a youth mobility scheme, or rather the EU might sign a youth mobility scheme with the UK, is so that they can deport all their unwanted immigrants to here. And people will love that. They'll bite immediately. They'll buy it. So we're at that point now, which I reached during the anti-Semitism swamp that mired Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, when we were talking about where these tropes come from, where these lies take hold. And I took a call I will never forget from a young woman who, I don't know why, it's probably a sign of my own inverted snobbery, was calling from Kensington, which made it more notable for me. It shouldn't have done, but, I am what I am, as Popeye famously stated. And she took me to task for describing it as anti-Semitism, to claim that the Jews controlled the world's media, And she actually said to me, it's not anti-Semitic to say that Jews control the world's media, James, because they do. That is where she'd got to. So anti-Semitism doesn't exist when you believe the anti-Semitic lies. And that's where we are now with immigration. Not just in Germany for the AfD voters, although as a lot of you remind me, it's only 20%, but that's a big... Only's doing a lot of lifting in a conversation about a party born from the Nazis. It's not far right to say that all my problems are because of immigration, because it's true. And when I ask you for proof, that makes me part of the elitist, the liberal elite. There's only me left now, I think. Certainly when Lineker hangs up his headphones on Match of the Day, that'll be it. Who else is there in this country? This all-powerful liberal elite that is responsible for all of the... Who else is there now? It's certainly in the UK media. Where are you going to go to find someone who says, do you know what? I think probably the very, very rich people... That your man on the Mail and your man on the Sun, the very, very, very rich people that they would never dream of saying anything negative about, probably a little bit more to blame than the Uber driver who took you home last night, or the doctor who just took your kid's tonsils out. But hey ho, liberal elite, that's me. So it's not far right to say that all my problems are because of immigration, because it's true. It's not anti-Semitic to say that the Jews control the world's media, because it's true. That's where we are now. Unless I'm wrong, in which case you know what to do. 0345 60 60973. Would you believe me if I said that some of Alice Wiedel's opponents in Germany, she's the leader of the AfD, would you believe me if some of her opponents were putting it about that she's actually gay, married to a Sri Lankan woman, and until very recently divided her time between Berlin and Switzerland, along with her partner, her Sri Lankan female partner, and her 2 sons? Would you believe me if I said that some of her opponents in her own party were putting that propaganda? No, it's true. But I wonder whether you knew that. So already they're talking about how real marriage can only be between a man and a woman, despite the fact that the leader is in a relationship with a woman, a Sri Lankan, a foreign woman, a non-ethnic. I don't know if she's a German citizen or not, but if she is a German citizen of non-ethnic German heritage. So are they going to deport the leader's partner? That's what I mean about lies. That's what I mean about how clearly it all emerges as utter horlicks as soon as you start tugging on any threads. But there it is. It's not a lie. It's not far right. It's not fascist. It's not Nazi, because it's true. Jews really do control the world's media. Jews really are responsible for the decline of Germany in the 1930s. Immigrants really are the reason why I can't get a big house or I can't get a job. It's just there. It's so obvious, but goodness me, it does feel increasingly important to keep pointing it out. Renata is in Bavaria in Germany, which doesn't really narrow it down, but it's fine by me. Renata, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning,
Hello.
James. I wanted to make you aware of another factor which only is true for the GDR, because, of course, racism and being anti-immigration is not concentrated on one part of Germany.
Of course.
But the people in the GDR, they had the feeling that they lived in a very peaceful island because they were never asked to decide in any crisis, They never had been asked to decide between different perspectives of future, of possibilities, or of things that included the one and excluded the other. So I think the people in the former GDR are nostalgic for a situation when there was a government who did everything, guided them, and they were not bothered. And they really felt like the world outside did not bother them very much as long as they lived in the GDR, you know.
But we were, I mean, we always hear about the Stasi and the, the secret police and the poverty and the food queues. And I don't think that's an inaccurate depiction.
No, they were not satisfied, but they were never asked to solve a problem. You see, it was all there were thousands of problems, and they had to solve them in their everyday life. But they felt, with the reunification, they felt like being thrown in a world where suddenly there is nothing to keep them away from poverty. There's nothing to keep them away from war. There's nothing to keep them away from any kind of attack which can come from every kind of corner. And that is the security for which they long. And this is why this AfD or Nazi ideology is so fascinating for them, because there is somebody strong who will do the things for us. And
so that's the power of propaganda. So even if I'm queuing for bread and I'm in danger of being locked up if my brother dobs me into the secret police, the propaganda was paternalistic. I felt that the state cared for me.
You did not have to. You had to find a solution in your private life, but you did not have to formulate a solution to the political era. You did not have to propose another kind of work, making the economy working, or making this working, or making the other working. People were really unhappy with lots of things, but today they feel as if suddenly they are put in responsibility for the things.
I haven't thought about this before.
That is too much for them.
I haven't heard this before. So I think you're critiquing totalitarianism, aren't you? And the reason why people go along with it.
They're longing for a friendly totalitarianism because it saves them from feeling responsible for things going wrong. You know, I really agree with Jackie in many ways, but there's one little thing she said, like the housing problem. Please let me tell you, in East Germany, they had so many people moving away. They do not have a housing problem.
Oh, really?
They kind of rebuilt cities, you know, because in the cities there were too many houses empty, so they turned these empty houses into parklands. They do have economic difficulties, but this is, you know, there are towns or cities in East Germany that do much better than some areas in West Germany. It's really different from area to area, you know. But what they really share is a belief that the government can do everything they want, and if this outcome is not good, it's because the government doesn't want to do good. And they feel confronted now with a multiple of questions, with different things. If we do this, then this will be the result. If we do the other, that will be the result. And they feel like it's asked too much of them.
To me, that's really thought-provoking, because I think it's a bit of a weak spot for those of us that have never lived in or alongside a totalitarian regime, is that I mentioned it earlier with regards to the Nazis 1.0, the idea that everybody was silently opposed to it but too frightened to speak out, or everybody had been oppressed into secrecy. But it wouldn't just apply to wartime. During peacetime, a totalitarian, I mean, you know, there will be lots and lots of people in Russia who think Vladimir Putin is a stand-up guy. It's not just Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. There'll be loads of Russians who think he's fantastic too. And why? Because they're not allowed access to challenge or dissent. And how weird it is that it's from that space that the ludicrous claims about our free speech being under threat come. Thank you, Renata. That was fascinating.
James O'Brien on LBC.
That's my homework for this week. Courtesy of Renata in Bavaria, finding out more about what you might call the cultural legacy of East Germany. I've already stumbled across a couple of things that add great weight to some of her suggestions. There is a famed campaigner from East Berlin. Annette Kahan, who was born into a Jewish family in East Berlin and went on to become one of the most prominent voices in the whole of Germany for minority rights. As long ago as 1998, she set up the Amadeo Antonio Foundation, named after an Angolan contract worker who was killed by skinheads in the East just a month after reunification. And she writes in her autobiography about foreigners speaking of how the doors of streetcars would be closed in their noses. This is this century. They spoke of the more or less blatant racism of their children's teachers, of the atmosphere against foreigners in various businesses and shops, attacks against sailors from North Africa, and of the particular way in which people with children would avoid them in public. And that, I suppose, is how you can end up with a woman who is in a relationship with a Sri Lankan woman leading a party that is calling for potentially the deportation of German citizens of non-ethnic German heritage. Because you're not supposed to ask for details. You're just supposed to feel the fear and the hate. Is there any more to it than that? 03456060973. And I got a couple of questions. I beg your pardon, a couple of phone lines free. Oh, no, it's gone. But I will have in a minute. How do you, I mean, it's helpful, isn't it? In many ways, Elon Musk and Steve Bannon doing the actual salutes has taken a lot of the heat out of the claims that these people doing very, very far-right and fascistic, or saying very, very far-right and fascistic things, shouldn't be labelled in any way with language associated with the far-right and with fascists. Doing the actual salutes is, in a sense, it's quite helpful, although, of course, people will still deny the evidence of their own eyes and ears. That goes with the territory. But the definition, I don't know how significant this is, but Tony Gallagher over at the Times, on his front page today, is no longer calling the AFD far right. I mean, they just are, by definition, because they seek to punish people, in my view, for their unavoidable background. German citizens of non-ethnic German heritage, like the leader of the AFD's wife or partner. I don't know if they're married, actually. But he's stopped it. He's gone for hard right. I don't know whether that's just a coincidence. I kind of doubt it. You've got the far-right leader, the French far-right leader, balking at the far-right gesture made by the fraudster and released prisoner Steve Bannon. Him saying, I can't give a speech at this place because that bloke just gave a Nazi salute from the stage. Nigel Farage and Liz Truss supremely untroubled by that kind of thing. So, I mean, how are we going to define it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. 1106 is the time. Stephen is in Berlin. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning.
Hello,
a big fan of your show, first-time caller.
Thank you, welcome.
And it's a shame that we meet under such depressing circumstances.
Yes.
What I want to say...
Go on.
Sorry.
No, you go on.
No. So what I was going to say is that, of course, this anti-immigrant and anti-immigrant sentiment that the AfD is very, very deftly sourcing and very deftly instrumentalizing is nothing new.
No, of course.
So we, as left-wingers, I'm 55, I grew up in Germany. In the 80s, there's this trope of sending back criminal foreigners. That's been going on for years. Yeah. The only big difference, and it's a very worrying difference, is, and Renate said it beautifully, I couldn't say it so eloquently, she really hit the nail on the head. And the problem is that whereas the CDU, which is the German Tories, if you so will, like the Tories, were a broad church. And part of that broad church was a real German national Nazi outlier. But what they always manage is they always manage to get them in and to appease them somehow. They threw them a bone, some legislature. And usually what they appease them is with economic growth. That doesn't really work with the East Germans anymore because they don't have the same type of commitment to West Germany. And in a way, West Germany was, when you look at what happened after 1990, the East Germans weren't asked. Yeah? So from one day to the next, 1990, October 3rd, they were part of Germany, which was de facto West Germany. Yeah. So they haven't got the same sort of commitment. Now, I'm on national radio, so I've got to be a bit careful. I would say not the commitment to democracy, but that's probably being a bit unfair to all the people there. They certainly don't have the commitment to the West German state, which, of course, the CDU embodies. Yeah, the CDU from Konrad Adenauer, who was the founder of West Germany. They embody the West. So not only can they put two fingers up to foreigners, but they're putting two fingers up to the establishment.
Yes.
And the real danger is here. So if the same thing happened 25 years ago in Austria, exactly the same thing.
Yes, it did.
And by the way, there was I lived there at the time. There was a persistent rumor that didn't go away that Jörg Haider was apparently homosexual.
Oh, really?
So there you go. There you go. And I thought it was a Brazilian, not a Sri Lankan, but you have probably better sources.
Well, I only read it this morning, so I mean, you mean Alice Wiedel's partner?
Yeah, Alice
Sarah.
Wiedel,
Well, she's described as a Sri Lankan partner, the filmmaker Sarah Bossard.
That's probably true.
There might be all manner. I mean, that's the point about the human condition, isn't it, Stephen? Is that most of us are made up of all manner of different ingredients and constituents. So the idea of deporting people who aren't pure enough is even more ridiculous.
Well, probably me. My mum's from Leicester.
Oh, God forbid. Well, we can forgive many things on this programme, Stephen. So it's all there.
Possibly one thing what makes this situation so dangerous is that before they could contain it within the party. I mean, of course, it's a lot more complex. I'm a political scientist. It's more complex, but this is definitely one of the issues, is that they could contain it within the CDU, CSU. Franz Josef Strauss, a very famous Bavarian right-wing politician, said, to the right from me is only the wall. Yeah, yes. So they've always wanted it, but that's no longer the case. What centrists like Merz, who really is a centrist, could do is they could buy them off. Now they can't.
No. And
now you've got 20% out there who, just like in Austria, if you look at migration policies in Austria in the late 90s, you had the Social Democrats, for God's sake. You had the Social Democrats implementing cruel and nasty migration policies just to please the FPÖ, and the same is going to happen here, and it never works. I don't know whether they bring logic to an illogical situation, but it's as if you think you can feed this monster just enough for it to stop demanding more food. And you can't. I mean, because as you say, you begin with calls for foreign criminals to be deported. Yeah. And so what if you do that and the problems that you have used to pretend that they're caused by foreign criminals not being deported don't go away? Well, then you call for foreign non-criminals to be deported, which is where the AfD has already gone. Or you start calling for people of the wrong ethnicity to be deported without mentioning that your own partner might be one of them. Well, Farage has been married to a succession of, or gone out with a succession of foreign women, but they're all right. That's not the kind of immigration that we've got a problem with. Yeah. And that is the big worry. That is going to be a theme, I think, moving forward, is that these economic promises are probably not keepable. So the people who are not motivated entirely by xenophobia and racism are going to have to find a way of conducting this conversation differently from how they currently are. Probably one more thing to that, if I may, James.
Yes.
I think what is particularly nasty, and you pointed out beautifully in your book, is that we have a sort of 20, 30, 40 years ago when we were young, yes. and a long time ago, you could deflate these things with facts a bit. I think that doesn't. They can say whatever they want.
Yeah.
They can say whatever they want. It would be provable on Facebook or on Twitter somehow.
Of course, and
really,
you can't.
Really
and it makes less and less of a mystery with every passing day as to why Elon Musk wants to buy it. And as if to prove Stephen's point, here's a message from Spencer. So I'm going to do a little bit more on letting you know what the big talking points are on the online right. So you have the leader of the French far right party pulling out of a conference speech because of Steve Bannon giving what the BBC like to describe as something that many people consider to be a Nazi salute, following on from Elon Musk giving blatant Nazi salutes. So Spencer has seen something on social media saying, "Are you forgetting your mate Sadiq?" And then he uses a vile word that I can't say on the radio, Khan, as the third word in that sentence, has done a Nazi salute full. And you read something like that and you think, okay, I wonder what you've looked at, but I wonder how hard it would be to debunk you. And it turns out that a former candidate for the London mayor, I don't even know which one, and I'm not sure he deserves the attention he was so obviously begging for, cropped a picture of Sadiq Khan giving a thumbs up to a crowd, and cropped the picture so that you couldn't see his thumb or the fact that his hand was clenched, the fingers were folded in. But you see, if you are a racist like Spencer, you don't need to check, because Sadiq Khan's brown and he's waving at a crowd with his thumb up, so he must be giving a Nazi salute. That's the point that Stephen makes. So Spencer's listening to this now. He's made an absolute tool of himself on national radio. But it won't change his mind. He will still believe what he believes, won't he? There it is. So the facts don't matter. And of course, if you are supportive of far-right policies and making gestures that look like Nazi salutes, you are in a different universe from somebody photographed waving. If it wasn't actually real, if people like Spencer didn't actually exist, it would be hilarious. You know, here's a picture of me waving at Keith. Oh, James O'Brien did a Nazi salute in his studio. It's incredible that people who are quite deliberately aping the symbolism of the Nazi movement, their sympathisers and supporters, like friend Spencer here, pretend that waving is the same as Sieg Heiling. And that is what happens when, as Stephen describes, that old ability, that nostalgic ability to use facts to defuse lies, often racist lies, no longer applies. It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Today's a school day, isn't it? 11:17 is the time. This really caught my eye. Someone sent me this as a quote, and I did a search on it just to work out where it came from, and that's how I stumbled across that campaigner who I quoted to you a moment ago. It's a writer called Brandon Tensley, who I think originally wrote this for the Washington Post, but we're going back 10 years. We're going back to October 2015. And it is really, really interesting. The East German government's failure to promote a culture of tolerance stemmed, at least in part, from its exceptionally flawed political posturing. The West German government inherited... This speaks directly to why the far-right party is so much more popular in the former East Germany than it is in the former West Germany. The West German government inherited the status of Nazi Germany's successor state, and in doing so, it was confronted with hard questions of National Socialism's bruising legacy. Indeed, Hitler's regime was, in a way, the original sin of West German national identity. The East German government, however, decided that East Germany wasn't merely a new state, but also an anti-fascist one, i.e. communist. And there clearly couldn't be xenophobic hate in an anti-fascist state, which was thereby freed from having to deal with the rattling bones of history. So that's what Renata introduced us to, that notion of totalitarianism, creating alternative realities. So you could have an incredibly xenophobic and racist state where the government insisted that it wasn't because it was by definition anti-fascist, even though life under an ostensibly left-wing totalitarian regime is a lot more akin to life under a right-wing totalitarian regime than it is under a liberal democracy. But there we are. This article is actually brilliant. I'll try and share it. The xenophobia constructed and propped up by the East German government continues to have crucial implications today. And that was wrote nine years before the far-right German political party got 20% of the vote in a national election. 11:19 is the time. Reinhardt is in Chesham. Reinhardt, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Hi. I wanted to say exactly what you just read out.
Oh, sorry.
Telepathy. No, I mean it's really an important point. I went to school in West Germany in the 60s, university in Berlin in the 70s. Had lots of friends in East Germany. In those days, I loved East Germany as well. So,
Yes.
and what really always shocked me was how my East German friends did really not identify with any of the shame and guilt that I felt as a West German about Hitler fascism. And I remember when I was 10, 11, we were hoarded at school into the auditorium and shown footage of the liberation of the concentration camps.
Blimey, that's young.
Oh, yeah, I'm still traumatized
Of course
from
you
that.
are, yes.
And, I mean, but they didn't do that in East Germany. They were very, very clear that nothing to do with us. we are rooted in the anti-fascist tradition, and they had their point, because most of their leaders after the war in East Germany were people who were persecuted by the Nazis. In Ulbricht lived in Moscow. He had to flee Germany. So there was a strong anti-fascist tradition in the East German ruling classes. So they said, well, it's actually just nasty capitalist aberration, fascism, and we are the alternative Germany, so we don't have anything to do with it. So I think that aspect of shame and guilt, which I carried very strongly and which was part of the reasons why I left Germany in the end.
Yeah.
The East Germans didn't have that, and
and that's not their fault. I mean, I know that's slightly simplistic language, but that is a consequence of the conditioning that you describe, not necessarily a free choice. I mean, there are exceptions. Angela Merkel came from the East, didn't she? So it's not. Obviously, it's not going to be true for everybody, but it's true enough to explain this extraordinary distinction between the West and the East when it comes to supporting far-right politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the other points that were made by previous German callers, giving different reasons for the popularity of the AfD in East Germany, they all are true, and they all kind of fit together. And if you piece all those different elements together, I think you have a good picture of why.
And I mean, I think again the chronicling of the stupid is I think important, even if people get offended by it. But when you hear people in this country describing the Nazis as actually being socialists, because they have the word socialist in their title, same people I think believe that if you see Purcell on the side of a bus, it means they sell it on the top deck. But but under that analysis, the shift to communism, or being behind the Iron Curtain, leads East German history to portray Hitler as a capitalist aberration, a capitalist perversion. Yeah, of course it does when you say it out loud. It makes perfect flipping sense, doesn't it? But not enough sense for some people. Reinhard, thank you. I don't want to ask you the next question, but I'm going to, because looking at this, and certainly the conversation we've had so far today, it's hard to imagine the AfD, as long as they're out of power, it's hard to imagine them diminishing in popularity anytime soon, as long as they can be the eternal heckler, blaming the country's problems or blaming the population's problems on foreigners, not charged with the difficult business of actually governing. It's hard to see them becoming less popular anytime soon.
I must say I'm not that concerned about it, because the anti-AfD feelings and sentiments in West Germany are so strong. It's unbelievable. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in the last few weeks, and whenever I speak to German friends, German family that I still have, I mean, the anti-feelings are really, really deep and strong, much deeper and stronger than any anti-Reform UK feelings in this country. So I trust that. Of course,
well, Germans know where it leads.
But to then consider that out of 48 constituencies in East Germany, the AfD won 45, I think. That's obviously concerning. But I'm not, and I do trust the traditional German politicians in their intention to keep the AfD out of any kind of power position. So
we shall see. And obviously everybody, well, at least I certainly hope you're right. I guess that people who like far-right politics or sort of Nazi reboots will hope that they do very, very well. But thank you for that. My understanding of this, as we approach 11:30, I can't remember the last time I've gone from 0 to 60 quite as quickly as I have today with the quality of calls. I said to you that we would have the right people listening. And once again, my wildest dreams have been exceeded. And we're not done yet. 03456060973. Agatha is in Beckenham. Agatha, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I would like to say that I disagree with a couple of your callers.
Of course.
Not on all of the contribution. But my point would be that the nationalistic tendencies are all over the Europe, and you can see them quite strongly in post-communist countries, and so is the Eastern Germany.
They both said that. I mean, you're talking about the post-industrial landscapes. There's people everywhere are susceptible to the idea that the reason why they are suffering economically is because of foreigners.
Precisely, and I would say that there is failure of German, and Germany is very particular because Germany is now united West and East. Neither of the post-communist countries are in that situation, I suspect. Germany is, and German governments over the past 30 years or so has failed to do what UK government is trying to do, level up. So I think your previous caller, Jenny, has mentioned that basically there is no infrastructure. The East Germans are not feeling as well off as the Western Germans. So it's like north of England is not feeling as well off as the south of England.
But that doesn't explain the next bit of the equation, does it? Which is I could be living in...
To me it does.
Well, why you would then become more susceptible to racist lies from a woman who spends most of her life living in Switzerland with an immigrant?
Maybe not directly connected to her, but to the party in general, it does. Because I, as a immigrant from post-communist country, I came to this country because I wanted to be better off, right? And so do people who stayed within Slovakia, where I come from. So they want opportunities, and if the immigrants come, and the Eastern Germans, they don't feel like they had all the opportunities because there is no infrastructure, there is no investment in Eastern Germany. Then they feel, precisely like many Brits feel, that we don't want immigrants because they're taking the opportunities from us. There is a massive potential within Eastern and Central Europe with regards to intelligence. So they feel if the government is not investing in us.
Yes, I know they do. I mean, forgive me, I know all this, but the point is the effort that is put into persuading people that the reason why they're not as well off as they think they should be is absolutely huge. The effort put into blaming it on foreigners is pretty much... It's pretty much the unleavened diet of the UK media. This country voted for Brexit, Agatha, because of people like you.
Yes, indeed. And Jenny said it correctly.
And they were lied to, and they were wrong, and they were indulging disgusting prejudices. But nonetheless...
But unless you live in a country, unless you live in that part, unless you are personally affected by some sort of hardship, you will not see it from their point of view, James, I'm afraid, I think.
No, of course I can. I can understand it, but they're personally affected by hardship, not personally affected by the consequences of immigration. It's the conflation of the two.
But they're being sold, they're being sold the lie, like you said.
No, I don't think. I think Renata and Stephen were conscious of this, but they probably weren't going in. I think probably it's a bit of a presumed background to any of these comments. But you're right, of course, and that's why the very carefully nurtured atavistic impulse to blame the foreigner for the economic situation, the individual economic situation. That's why it is so commonplace. You even get extremely well-paid members of my profession talking about the elites not letting the people have their say about immigration. You say, what is it that these people aren't allowed to say about immigration? And you're back to the conversation about free speech. Farage this week on that conference that the leader of the French far right wouldn't go to after Steve Bannon gave his apparently Nazi salute, claiming that you can't say what you want in this country without being sent to prison. And no one is going to ask him what it is that he's not. What is it you want to say that you're worried about being sent to prison for? So the lies and the liars are absolutely inextricable. But I don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If it needs saying, I'm grateful to you for saying it, except for the fact that the actual economics of the money that West Germany or Germany spent on East Germany knocks any talk of Labour's levelling up completely off the pitch. And billions and billions and billions of Deutschmarks or Euros or whatever you want to call it. But, of course, it's not enough. And if you haven't got what you wanted and someone comes along and says, oi, blame that fella over there, and then you're going to be susceptible to it. And that's not a German condition. That's a human condition. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
7:33 is the time. A few people taking issue with the last caller, Agatha, in a perfectly friendly way, but the infrastructure investment into East Germany, David takes up the point as well. I've lived in Saxony for 30 years. The improvement in infrastructure has been bigger than any other country I can think of, and quite a few people picking up on the sheer scale of investment. Stephen, a little less friendly perhaps. What Agatha is saying is demonstrably and objectively false. Parts of Eastern Germany have been very lavishly funded over the past 30 years. I can give you the numbers as soon as I'm back at my desk. But it doesn't matter, does it? If you feel less well off than your neighbour, or if you feel that Johnny Foreigner over there is getting something that rightfully should be yours, then you're going to be susceptible to this sort of rhetoric. But it is important, as you say, to have the facts in front of us. And I mean, also grateful to John in Edinburgh for a very nice message, which I've probably managed to... Oh, no, here it is. As a historian who studied German history from the early 19th century to the fall of the Third Reich, I feel qualified to say that the contributions of your callers, and of course yourself, this morning has been absolutely brilliant once again. Thank you. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I can only work with what you give me, and what you've given me today is a much, much better understanding of why the east of Germany is much more likely to vote for the AfD than the west. I think less happily, we haven't had much challenge to the idea that all the AfD really offer is that age-old promise that by treating foreigners really badly, your life will get better. Just don't mention the fact that my own partner is a foreigner and therefore an immigrant. And indeed, I spend much of my life living in Switzerland, which makes me an immigrant as well. Because as we discovered after Brexit, they don't mean you. It's a different kind of immigrant, a Jewish one or a Muslim one, a brown one or an Eastern European one, not a Western European one. Although the personal life of the leader of the AfD is interesting, isn't it, to say the least. 25 minutes to 12 is the time. So how are we going to define it? That phrase far right, as Tony Gallagher, the editor of the Times, whether at Rupert Murdoch's behest or not, stops using the phrase far right to describe the far right AfD and goes instead for hard right. I've seen suggestions it's because if they carry on describing the AfD as far right, then they'll have to start describing Farage's outfit as far right as well. There might be some truth in that, but I don't know. How do you define it? How do you describe it? We'll get stuck into that, I think, before 12 today. And on that subject of the really, I don't know what you'd call them, complicit members of the actual establishment and the actual elite, Lucy takes up the point, talking about people claiming that socially liberal politicians lecturing people about immigration had somehow turned a majority of the voters of the AfD party. This is wrong on several counts. I've heard that argument being made, but I don't know really whether people are just a bit dim or deeply dishonest when they say that people vote for the Nazis when liberals keep telling them why immigration is a net positive for a country. Firstly, writes Lucy, I choose not to vote for the AfD because of my own convictions, my social contract, my own personal political leanings. Secondly, it has way more historical depth than that. It's so much more complicated for the people who live here in the East. Lucy is writing from Dresden. There's some explanations I understand, although it doesn't excuse the anger here. I'm so sad at the results. So I don't know how long it'll be before we get columnists in this country suggesting that the reason why the AfD has done so well is because of all of the liberal elite or leftist politicians not listening to people's complaints about immigration. To which I'd ask you to make a quick list of all the politicians in Parliament at the moment that are regularly explaining why we need high immigration in this country. I'll wait. I'm still waiting. Yeah. But as we've established, when you bring race and immigration into a conversation, people often don't notice they're being lied to. It is 11:38. Catherine is in Warrington. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Hi, yes.
Hello.
I've listened to your previous caller about that East Germans don't identify themselves with the Nazi regime. You know, we in school, I grew up in East Germany, and we had to visit concentration camps, and we had to learn in school about the Nazis. And I don't know where he got this from. because it's just not true. And I still feel to this day the shame and how this could have happened. I was talking to my grandma. How could you vote for Hitler?
Yeah.
And she they don't know. It's just I'm just so nervous. Sorry.
Oh, no, of course you are. Take all the time you want. I mean, to defend Reinhardt a bit, I think he was drawing. And obviously you've got the experience of being educated in East Germany, so that conversation is over. But he was drawing more attention to the sort of distinction between West Germany as the inheritor of the shame of the Holocaust and East Germany having a sort of, because of the government's insistence that it was an anti-fascist state, there was a different relationship with the past.
Yes, I think that the problem is that, when the border came down, when the wall came down, that all the good things in East Germany, they were destroyed. I think they lost the identity. So a lot of people lost identity, and in East Germany they don't have really big contacts with foreign people. And I think it's just, in a lot of people, it's just fear of the new. In West Germany, grew up with a lot more immigration. And if you are a bit aggrieved, if you do feel that you haven't got as big a slice of the pie as you want, then you're a lot more susceptible to that sort of rhetoric. Yes. Even if you have got a decent slice of the pie, I can still frighten you by saying they're going to come and take it off you, which is the editorial policy of the Daily Mail for the last 40 years. Yes, and they're saying he got more, or they got this, and they will have this when they come, and they have more than me, and that's... So why is that more... Given that the economic situation in West Germany is suboptimal at the moment, why do you think the East now, all these years after the wall came down, why are they so much more likely to lean towards the AfD than their compatriots on the other side of where the wall used to be? I think the representation of East German people is missing in high government roles. I think that's because with Angela Merkel they could connect in a different way, but I think that because that is missing, that a lot of East German people are not represented in the government, in the parties, and that's a big problem. I hear you. Yeah, I mean, I guess that must be part of it. Can I ask you a slightly cheeky question? Yes, yes. Just because you know me, I like to keep the peace among all of my listeners and callers. How old are you, Catherine? I'm 50. Okay, so you were receiving your education before the wall came down. Yeah, I was 15 when the wall came down. Yeah. And you were visiting the concentration camps before that. Yes, you just Mark has picked up on it. Mark's picked up on how youthful you sound, and he was just wondering whether perhaps your school days were conducted after the fall of the Berlin Wall. No. But we all had to celebrate Jugendweihe in East Germany, and part of this celebration is that you had to visit a concentration camp. Right. So yeah. Just a different relationship with the shame, clearly, for many, many people, but not obviously for all. It's a slight. I don't think it falls under lazy stereotyping, but it certainly falls under generalisation because, of course, Angela Merkel, like you, came from the East, and there'd be plenty of people in the West who were drawn to the politics of the AfD. But the idea, when I talk about the different relationship with shame, it's largely as a consequence of the callers that have educated me today, but also with the words of the co-founder of the party ringing in my ears when he talked about Hitler and the Nazis being just a speck of bird poop in more than 1,000 years of successful German history, and talked another regional leader of the party talked about how we need a 180-degree turn on our relationship with Nazi crimes from the past. And that's kind of scary. And as you say, when you ask your grandmother how people could have voted for Hitler, and people can't tell you today. I don't know, actually, looking back. But
Lessons. Stephanie is in. I might come to Stephanie actually after the break because there's not a lot of time there, and these are not contributions that lend themselves to quick to quick snatches, are they? It's just gone 11:44. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What we will do in the final hour of the programme, tempting though it is to continue with this absolutely fascinating conversation, we should probably return our attentions a little closer to home. I've got a really interesting misinformation for you. I've also got a choice, really, between the extraordinary number of pupils who are not going to school and these skills shortages that I alluded to a moment ago when worrying about what happens. And I'd say it was probably closer to when than if the economic growth that they're all saying is the only way to deal with the far right doesn't materialise. What happens next? I'm going to put forward a very controversial idea here. The way to deal with the far right is not necessarily through providing economic growth, but it's by telling the truth. And you could probably begin with people pretending to believe that the reason why anyone ends up leaning towards the Nazis is because their complaints about immigration are being ignored. It's the exact opposite. It's because the lies and complaints about immigration are being unchallenged, which ends up leading people by the nose into supporting parties that promise to deal with these largely but not entirely non-existent problems by punishing people who are not remotely responsible for them. So if you've ever wondered how Nazism happens, how fascism happens, the first place you've got to look to is often the people in control of the newspaper columns or the people sitting behind the microphones. I'm supremely conscious of that. I just worry sometimes that not everybody else is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's definitely a conversation to be had here. How many homes in this country do you think are worth £1 million or more? I mean, is that a meaningless question? Do you need to know how many homes there are in total for that to really land? Or do you want to just have a guess at it anyway? So how many homes in the UK, the whole of the UK, are worth at least £1 million? I want the actual number, not the percentage, because if I knew the full number, I'd be able to work out the percentage, wouldn't I? So the total number of homes, the actual figure that are worth over £1 million, because it speaks to this weird thing we've got going on, doesn't it? Where some people are better off than ever before on paper, but they don't feel it. But anyway, I digress. That's just a bit of a hook and tease for you. See if you can get through to it. 11:49 is the time. Back to Germany, or at least the German election result. Stephanie is in Oxford. Stephanie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Stephanie.
I'm a little bit nervous. I'll preface that.
It's only me.
So I grew up in East Germany too, and in the state of Thuringia, which is right on the border with the West. And my family were half and half, living on both sides of the border. And essentially, we went to visit a concentration camp. I was 10 when I went. So most German children have to go by the time they're 16 as part of history lessons. But my parents were in the Air Force back in the day. So I don't know if this was across the force as children, but we went when we were 10, which I found a highly traumatizing experience. Then when the school system changed, Schindler's List came out, we watched that in school. So it's just, I guess, taking a viewpoint with Reiner's view. So I think while the GDR categorized itself as an anti-fascist state, there was no denial of fascism. We paid reparations to the Soviet Union for decades and were seen as, we were sort of told that we were really paying for the war. The West wasn't paying back. They had the Americans, the Marshall Plan. They had money put in. We had money taken out. We paid to the Soviet Union for decades.
We only stopped paying our debt. The UK only stopped paying its debt to the US about 6 years ago. So, I mean, that was a historically questionable lesson that you were receiving as well. With this perspective you've got then, this kind of foot on both sides of the border, why do you think the rhetoric of the AfD is so much more effective in the East today than the West?
I was talking to your producer about this. I'm baffled because...
well, that's no good.
No. In the sense of about 10 years ago or so, they, to me, seemed very much like a ragbag of conspiracy theorists, You had the COVID deniers, and I remember my British partner. We go regularly over there.
There's a huge
and he was very
crossover
welcome.
There's a huge crossover actually in COVID deaths and infections and non-vaccination so if you to divide Germany
I
according to that,
him,
it would look very, very similar.
Well, and I remember saying to him, these are the same people who in the UK would vote for Brexit. So I remember we had those discussions and so this is the interesting point. My hometown, the mayor of my hometown has been Katja Wolf for the last 10 years of the left-wing party. And the Thuringia state was Die Linke, the left-wing party, has been governing in Thuringia. Our president was Bodo Ramelow from Die Linke. So there was the AfD weren't strong. More recently, the AfD have obviously gained ground, not so much in my hometown, but in the state.
Right.
And generally speaking, obviously, as we know, there's been a shift more to the right across Europe. I think a lot of this is linked to... It's not so much to do with economic reasons. So I think the AfD's performed really well in this election because more people in the West have also voted for them. So even though they were stronger perhaps in Thuringia and Saxony, they wouldn't come second overall in Germany if they hadn't gained ground in the West. And
I mean, you're right. I mean, you must be right. They've done better. Now, hang on. I just explaining why we've taken that line on the conversation this morning. If you see the map coloured in according to the vote, it is pretty much where the wall was. I mean, it's well, not where the wall was, obviously, but it's pretty much where the national divide between the West and East was. I mean, it's truly arresting when you actually see it in black and white or red and blue or whatever colours you prefer.
But it has been in the march in West Germany, and I think there's the overall movement, like say in Italy with Meloni and other states that we've had, the Dutch, there's been a lot of backlash. Now, I think it's not immigration per se. So, like my best friend is married to a Turkish German in the East. It's all fine. As I said, my partner he's white British, but he goes there. Has been going for, nearly 30 years. It's absolutely fine. There are foreigners. We have a lot of Russians in my area.
Really?
But yes, we do, and we have had since East German times. So again, now we have more Ukrainians, obviously, refugees and so forth. But the real issue is, I think, a lot of the immigration since 2015. So let me quote, and this is not internet gossip or internet kind of weird things people put out there. This is ZDF, which is the equivalent of BBC Two. They have a lot of information on their website, and they have said, this is all in the last year because I've spoken to Ali Miraj before, but there was 7,000 extra attacks against women, sexual attacks, from the group of immigrants since 2015. So that's one figure.
What's the overall total?
I don't know.
Well, we kind of have to, don't we?
Well,
because if you're suggesting that people are more upset about attacks when they're undertaken by immigrants than they are when they're undertaken by native Germans, you have to have that. You have to have that figure.
It's horrific. It's horrific either way. But this is what they were saying was the extra data, and this is in the mainstream.
That's not extra data.
It's out there.
That's not data at all, unless you can tell me how many there are in total.
I don't know. I'm only going by what it said yesterday.
So I'm going to vote because there's been an increase.
I think some people vote for the AfD.
Hey, of course they do, because you've read that article. It's exactly, you've illustrated not necessarily the point you were hoping to make. Yeah. By having statistics like that out there without context, people can arrive at all sorts of conclusions. Sadly, it will include your friend's husband. If he looks Turkish, he will be carrying the can for the crimes that you're describing. And how any journalist, if it really is the equivalent of BBC Two, can publish data like that without having national context is a huge part of the problem that the whole world is facing. Here is a figure that is utterly meaningless when removed from all context.
You can read up on it. This was a few months ago. I don't know now.
I can't. You've only just told me about it.
Yeah. That's the bit I remember. I don't know if there were an overall figure in it. If there was, I don't remember it. My point was, I'm trying to tell you what I think people experience.
Oh, I don't need any, but none of us need lessons in how effective it is to claim that all foreigners are responsible for crime or that this crime here. The bottom line is, if you get punched in the face, it doesn't hurt more if the person punching you is white or brown. It only feels like it hurts more when the media and politicians are dedicated to pretending that ethnicity is somehow an indicator of criminality. And that's how the Holocaust happened. That's how people ended up getting rounded up. I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm just struck by the source that you cite, which I have no personal knowledge of. But these are the kind of things that the media seems to be doing more and more now. If indeed you report correctly, there you have it. What is the point of a figure if you haven't got the overall figure? It's a bit like the grooming gangs conversation in this country. What percentage of child sexual abuse is it? And tell me why I'm supposed to be more angry about some pervert from one religion than I am about some pervert from a different religion. I don't get it, and I don't know that I ever will, actually. Thank you, Stephanie. Brian is in Paderborn in Germany. Brian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'd just like to mention my experiences and why I think a lot of people are deciding to now vote AFD. Just to give you my background, I'm a former soldier, served 92 to 2017, just short of 25 years in total, and retired and settled in the local area.
Go on.
Right, so now the main one that I see a lot of people focus on is the recent attacks, be it Schaffenberg, Berlin, Munich, and all the rest of it. That's a big concern to people.
Why would that be a bigger concern in the East than the West?
Propaganda, I'd say.
But they're getting the same propaganda.
Well, yeah, they're getting the same propaganda as the...
It's not propaganda. I mean, these attacks actually happen. They get a heck of a lot more coverage than other types of crime because they are unique types of crime. But the question today is, why is it more effective in the East than in the West?
Well, that's a hard point. I mean, there's...
That's the main question we're asking this hour.
I think a lot of it is due to previous politics. You know, the fact that within the East, it was part of the former DDR. They were part of a very repressive society, and they seem to have a distrust of authorities and official news sources. I mean, you've got in Germany the ARD and ZDF, which is the equivalent of the BBC, and they'll push facts. You know, they're there to report on the news. They're not there to report on a right-wing rhetoric. And
so the East, the access.
It's use of things.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
It's use of things like TikTok and all the rest, the quick information media that the AFD are using now. A lot of their voters, a lot of their new voters that they've got are very, very young, and it's the sources that they're using. And it's difficult for young people at work to sit down and go through political histories, look at real reasons. But TikTok videos, they work very well.
And yet, do you know the weirdest breakdown in the context of your call and Stephanie's before is that young women in Germany are tacking to the left. They're not tacking to the right or indeed the far right.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we've got a very much cross-reference of people from within society where I work and all the rest. And at the dinner tables at breaks, we have these sort of conversations, and there's a couple of people that I work with that, despite being very strong right wing, they are good friends of mine. I disagree with them a lot, but the rhetoric they'll push is about how they worry about their daughters, how they worry about their wives, and yet from the girls at work, I mean, I remember a conversation recently, one of the girls cut in and said, well, this has never happened to me. I've never experienced any of this.
The percentage of as we all know, child sexual abuse and other forms of abuse that happens in the family, in the home, the likelihood of you being... these conversations that had to be had, but you need the statistics in front of you. More likely to be a family member than it is to be a foreigner. But I don't know. Some people don't want to hear that, which is why it is so interesting that the demographic least... seduced, if you like, by this sort of rhetoric is the demographic of young German women. And that picture, I'll post it now, Henning Venn, the rather splendid German a comedian who I think he came here. I used to know Henning. I haven't seen him for years. He came here to work as a press officer in a low league football club, would you believe? But he's one of the shiniest jewels in the crown of UK comedy. He's sent a picture which proves precisely the point I was trying to make to Stephanie. Quite staggering, he says. Black are the constituencies won by the CDU, CSU. Blue the constituencies won by the AFD. Can you spot the exact location of the old inner German border? That's the phrase I was searching for, the inner German border, and I'll post that now on my Blue Sky account, and which I probably should have done sooner, actually, now that I think about it. But it is absolutely stunning and probably important. It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. Richard's been in touch to say, my German wife has just commented that young women are tacking to the left because they are more intelligent than the young men. If only it were that simple. Richard, I don't know when we'll return to conversations about German politics, but I enjoyed that. I mean, you can tell by the fact that we did it for 2 hours. I enjoyed that even more than I was expecting to. I think a complete change of pace now. Tempting though it is to talk about the skills shortage, I think it inevitably leads us back into the absence of anybody really in the public space explaining why we need immigration in this country. I don't know if the same applies in Germany, but we'll keep that in the fridge, shall we, for later this week? Should we do that later this week? I think we should. I need to reveal to you, as we discuss house building, I need to reveal to you how many homes in this country are worth £1 million or more. Shall I tell you now? Would you like to know now? I don't know how significant this is. I don't even really know what it means, except the straight, simple numbers. But I think you're looking at 700,000 homes in this country now worth over £1 million or more. So, I mean, you need to break that down a little bit, don't you? How many of them are going to be largely mortgage as opposed to actual equity or actual asset? And London has recorded the biggest increase in £1 million homes in the last year, with 1 in 11 homes in this bracket. So I got a taxi to the station yesterday in Kidderminster, and I had a lovely driver, and talking about property, you realise there are exceptions, obviously. I know Sandbanks is bonkers, and other parts of the world where, but supremely desirable locations have extremely high price tags. But London's a different country. Trying to explain to somebody in Kidderminster what you get for £1 million in London just makes you sound like you're living in a bubble. And then you suddenly realise halfway through the conversation that, guess what? You're living in a bubble. It's truly fascinating. And also I had that little moment again. I hardly ever get there, but Worcestershire Parkway Station. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's like some sort of science fiction vista. There's no homes anywhere near. Don't at me about this. You explained it to me last time and I understand. But it's absolutely mad. It's like you've got an enormous national rail hub in the middle of nowhere. And it makes perfect sense when you actually look into it. But I always find it staggering every time I visit. We're going to talk instead about schools. And I want to come at this. I don't know if you heard last week that we looked at, what was the subject we were looking at, where I wondered if it was discipline in schools. Do you think it's because my children are now reaching the age where they're leaving school? One's already at university, one's in the sixth form, that I'm no longer seeing education through the lens of their experiences? I don't know, but last week we found ourselves reflecting on the difference between discipline and nastiness, and the dangerous conflation of nastiness with discipline. And we concluded that a little bit more strictness in schools, with a lot of caveats and conditionals and explanations, a little bit more discipline in schools would probably be a good thing, as long as it wasn't unpleasant. And I explained my journey to you about with regard to corporal punishment and the way in which I could have ended up at some point in my life mildly drawn towards, well, not even mildly, but passionately supportive of the idea that corporal punishment was a good idea. So I was introduced to the word pendulous, which didn't mean what I thought it meant. It means pendulum-like. And I use pendulums, as you know, to describe stories that reflect changing social attitudes. I'm mentioning all of this because I've always been very sympathetic towards children who refuse to go to school, on the basis that in this year, at this period in history, you're dealing with post-lockdown trauma, you're dealing with a huge uptick in mental health conditions, mental health diagnoses, and you're dealing with a generation that really has had everything turned upside down by recent events. I'm also always reminded, in fact, whenever we turn our attention to this conversation, I'm always reminded of the very first producer I ever had, and I've told you this before, who, when we were having a conversation about truant, he posited the existence of a single mother of a 16-year-old boy who, for the sake of argument, is 6'4" to her 5' nothing in her stockinged feet. And if he's saying, I'm not going to go to school, what on earth is she going to do about it? And it was really in the context of the conversations that we've had about punishing parents when their children don't go to school and how feasible that is. And obviously in some circumstances, there are going to be parents who are disengaged and who do not care. But they're also the ones least likely to be susceptible to punishment. They're probably the least likely, I am going to generalise a bit, they'll be the least likely to pay any fines that they are given. So it just struck me as a very tabloidy response to a very real problem. But it's a much, much bigger problem today than it was when we first had this conversation all those years ago. Almost a third of children have refused to go to school at least once in the past year. Okay, so we break it down and look at what that actually means. The massive majority missed 1 to 2 days. And I think this is a refusal as opposed to a bona fide illness or reason. So 31% of children had refused to go to school on more than one occasion in the past year. So looking at the figures, 1 to 2 days is by far the biggest factor, with primary school edging just a little bit ahead of secondary school. So I don't want all the teachers to come after me on this, but if a child has just said, we call it a duvet day when you're a grown-up, right? God, I've changed, haven't I, from my days as a disciplinarian. When the situation is such that the child has just said, I can't face it today, and if it's 1 or 2 days the year, mum or dad have said, oh, all right then, you can have a duvet day. I can live with that. Then the second biggest constituency of children is 3 to 4 days in a year. And again, although here secondary school outstrips primary school, 3 to 4 days in a year? That's 1 day a term where they're not actually ill, but they might just be knackered or they can't face it. Is that really the cause of concern that we're being told that it is? And then you get into the area that clearly is cause for concern. 96% of parents of school-age children believe it's very important for pupils to go to school every day if they could, but 31% of children had refused to go. And the biggest reason they give is not enjoying school. Arguments are a weekly occurrence for about 34% of parents. Daily arguments are about 6%. 32% of us say they never had arguments with their children about attendance. And here's the thing, right? I like some of the tropes we throw up about what children say to adults. So my favourite is probably, I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be born. I've never had that said to me by my own children. I feel like I've done something wrong as a parent. The second most popular is, you can't make me, when of course they can. But what if they can't? So what actually happens in that moment? I think what I'm asking you is, where is the line between sympathy and duty? So imagine it's Keith. And on Thursday of next week, Keith gives me a call and says, I just can't face it today. I just can't. If that's happening once a term or once a year, I think I'm going to say to Keith, all right, it's not in my gift, by the way, you'd have to speak to the managing editor, but I would say to Keith, all right, why don't you have a duvet day? Why don't you take it easy? Why don't you do why don't you just push back? And why would a child be any less susceptible to that than an adult? But then there is clearly a threshold above which this becomes a major problem, where you go from 1 or 2 days a year where you, in consultation with your child, you decide that you are going to accept her insistence that she can't go, or you are going to believe him when he says he just can't face it. And then an area in which you know is a problem. And what I want you to talk to me about is being in the area of the problem. So you know that you're caught up in something that is beyond your control. A lot of people have cited long COVID and related conditions as reasons for poor attendance. That's why this line is blurred between refusing to go and genuinely not being able to go. 69,000 children living with long COVID. It's like there's been some sort of a murder about it in this country. I talk about it when I can. You can't talk about it every day. 69,000 is not, a traffic stopping figure in the great scheme of things, but for those 69,000 families, it's probably the single most important thing in their life. The Times speaks today to a 15-year-old diagnosed 3 years ago who simply says some days she cannot get out of bed. She doesn't want to stay at home. Missing school makes me feel lonely and sad, she says. And teachers, according to her mum, have been very, very inconsistent. There's no national guideline on this. There's no real policy. Some teachers are really supportive, some really don't understand. And of course, depending on how overworked your teacher is, the effort that is needed to make sure kids don't fall behind, or the effort that is needed to make sure they can keep up, is going to change hugely from school to school, from sector to sector, and even from teacher to teacher. So the Education Secretary is now going to write to the 100 academy trusts and councils whose schools have the worst attendance. I don't think fines work. They've already gone up. It's now £80 for the parents whose children have, well, that's for term time holidays. But for parents who don't send their children to school, the fines have already gone up. The chief executive of Parent Kind says we need an end to the finger-wagging approach and need to give parents more support. And that's the space I want to move into, if I can. I want to know two things. I want to know what it's like when your child can't go to school. And I want to know what the difference is between a child who can't go to school and a child who won't go to school. I have absolutely no idea why it's taken me 13 minutes to get to that question, because it's one of the most beautifully simple questions I've ever asked you, and I could probably have asked it at 12:05. What is the difference between can't go to school and won't go to school? If you are of school age and this is pertinent to you, do remember that you need an adult's permission to talk to me on the radio. But that's the crucial question. Have I told you about the vomit that I used to make when I was about 9? I hated school at that age, and I don't really know why. I just hated it. I went from loving it to hating it in the space of about a term and a half. And there's no sort of psychologically interesting reason for it. I went from being quite engaged to being unbelievably bored. And it would be on Monday mornings, just before I started boarding. You've got to be a really impressive school child to manage to skive school when you're at boarding school, but you'll be pleased to hear I managed on many occasions. Just before I started boarding, I'd get the plastic mixing bowl from downstairs. I'd put milk in it and chopped up bits of bread. I'd like to think that I put some sweet corn in it, because it seems to be a crucial constituent part of the recipe, but I wouldn't have done. A, because I'd have to have opened a tin to get hold of some sweet corn and my mum would have noticed. Actually, that's A, B and C. And I would mix up Kiora orange juice and milk and bits of bread to make what looked like vomit. And then I would sneak back upstairs before mum and dad got up. I only did this 2 or 3 times. And I suspect the carpet was probably the biggest victim of this practice. And I would throw my homemade vomit over the carpet, and then I'd call my mum, like you do when you ring in sick. You put on that voice. Hello, I've got laryngitis. No, not that. I think I've got norovirus. I can't get off. Both ends, boss. Seriously, it's terrible. And that speaks to a really, really deep desire not to go. But that was won't, not can't. There was nothing to stop me, but I would go to extraordinary efforts to avoid it. And that is the perfect illustration of what I'm trying to distinguish between. Because a child who doesn't want to go to school is perfectly normal, but will go to enormous lengths to avoid it. And the challenge that a parent faces, if you think of it in those terms, for example, I'll check with Mum after the show, actually, whether she knew what I was up to at the time. But how suspicious would my mum need to be? I don't think she would have. To actually think your child has gone downstairs and manufactured their own vomit in the cake bowl in order to just get one day off school. It would never be for more than a day. So do you see what I mean? So if your mum, if your child is displaying to you a deep inability to go to school today, even if in the back of your mind you're suspecting that they're swinging the lead, or you think that they just want a duvet day, or they're skiving, how can you prove it? You can't prove it. Your child is the person you love most in the world, and you want to believe, can't or won't. So Bridget Phillipson doesn't seem to be very interested in that distinction. She describes an epidemic of school absence. 1 in 6 children, that's the key figure, persistently absent from school this academic year. I don't know whether this is going to make me sound incredibly naive to you, but I suspect 90% of them are in good faith. 5% of them are swinging the lead, and 5% of them have got parents who simply aren't doing their job. I don't believe that there is a huge swathe of school children, and the phone lines will be open. Actually, they should be open already. But I don't believe that there's a huge swathe of school children who are perfectly capable of going to school, but are just skiving. 0345 6060 973. Using your experiences or your insights as a parent, a teacher, or a former child. That includes just about everybody, doesn't it? What is the difference between can't go to school and won't go to school? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12. The difference between can't and won't, because we've all done can't, and if you didn't, then you're a big square, frankly. If you've never, ever skived a day off school, then I don't think we ever could have been friends. But if it's can't, how do you know? How do you as a parent know that this is not the swinging of the lead? This is an actual inability to do it. Long COVID is cited as a major example in this story, but it is by definition impossible to pin down. Let's start with Christy, who's in Sevenoaks. Christy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I've got 2 children, one who is now 19, one who is 17. The older child has autism and found school really, really tough. He's at college. Every day would be a battle to get him to go in, and I'm talking from primary school, from Class R. Every single day there'd be a meltdown about going in. But
what's a meltdown? I know you know what that means, but a lot of people listening won't know.
Of course. So that would be technically at the end of the day. So when he was exhausted from going to school, the thought of going to bed and having to get up in the morning to go to school, he would have a temper tantrum, for lack of a better word, and that would be right up until he was probably 14 years old. And then at that point, you're talking about almost a man-sized child who is throwing stuff and completely losing it. But he would always go in, always.
But only because of your patience. No, only because you would ride this meltdown
and it was a feeling
and come out the other end of it.
Yeah, and we thought that it was what you had to do. You know, we want your education to be the best it can be. You need to go. He also, at that point, didn't have the diagnosis, so we didn't understand.
Okay, so he would be having all sorts of sensory nightmares at school, the noises in the crowds and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it would be really tough. Yeah. And then my younger son was doing GCSEs. I think that the pressure of all of that started to come to a head. He would start to refuse to go in, and by that I mean just say, I'm not going. I'm not getting out of bed. Yeah. I'm not going. 16-year-old boy, 6 foot tall. It's very hard to get him in. And we were at that point of the mindset of, well, you need to go in, you're nearly at GCSEs, this is so important, nothing else, matters at this point.
Yes.
And now he started his A-levels, and turns out that it was anxiety that has now reached a point that he can't even leave the house, yet alone go to school. So he's completely out of education. And that's the difference, is that he physically can't go into school anymore. So he will, I've tried driving him, and it's to the point that he's retching,
and it's irrational.
Vomiting.
It's irrational.
It is
but
irrational. Real. Yes. And I wish that we'd known earlier. Hindsight is great. It's easy to look back and feel guilty about everything, but we were asking him the right questions. We were talking to school. Unfortunately, the waiting list for counselling at school was more than 100 children long, so there was no way that he could get seen by somebody there in time to chat about why he was struggling so much at school, because he is academic. He doesn't have any issues with learning. He's bright, and we just thought he'll be fine. It's going to be no problem. He's just being difficult. And actually there was this massively underlying problem that now... And
it's weapons grade anxiety that we're talking about here.
Yes. Yeah, and it's really hard. So we are now trying... He's not in the headspace to be able to accept help. CAMS have tried to get involved, so have early help, but when the child won't engage, there's nothing that they can do. So they can support me, and they have, and they've given us advice. But we've had to do a complete 180 mentally as to what we
how hard is
have in our
that? When
heads.
did you start believing him? Because there must have been days when you didn't believe him. You just thought you were doing something wrong, or he needed a metaphorical kick up the backside.
Yeah, so I would say I realised it in September when he went back for his A-levels, and we got to day 2, and he just called me
from school.
From school as a 16-year-old boy in the toilet, saying, "I'm being sick. I need you to come pick me up." Yeah. Almost begging me to come and collect him, which of course I did. And I thought, he's just ill. Gave him a couple of days off, and then it snowballed. So he would walk to the train station. He could get the train. Then the next day he couldn't even get to the train station. Then the next day he couldn't leave the house, and it went like that. So we spoke.
And there's no
school,
obvious answers. Just for the benefit of the tape, he's not getting bullied badly or bullied at all.
No, he's got an amazing network of friends that have been so supportive. Just cannot do it. And I think it's a combination of the pressure of GCSEs, the pressure that COVID put on him to work from home, me not realising he felt pressure and
don't beat
concentrating
yourself
on my
up.
child that needed.
No, there's no way you could have. You're not psychic, are you?
Yeah, this is the thing, and it's great to be able to look back and go, oh, could have done this, should have done that, but now it's focusing on what do we do now.
What about the school? Yeah. I mean, because Karen points out, we always ask what's wrong with the kids in these sort of conversations. We never ask what's wrong with the school. I don't know how fair that is in this case.
No, in his case, I think the school did everything they could. I had a number of meetings with them. In regards to my other child that was struggling, the older son that didn't have the diagnosis until later on, there was a lot that the schools should have and could have done to help him, and that's frustrating now to know that there was so much more that could have been.
Well, you keep saying that, and I'm not going to patronise you by saying that none of us have ever got, there's no objective algorithm for parenting.
No.
And there might have been a couple of things you could have spotted sooner, but equally, it could have been worse. You could have not been. I'll read you something from Corpsey, who's one of my longest-standing listeners. Back in the days when I even read out emails, Corpsey would be at the top of my inbox. He says, "I've literally just dropped off the youngest at school after dealing with 2 cases of refusal, and I'm more than a little frazzled. Here's the difference. There is one point on the way in where they behave as if you're pushing them off a cliff. Your toes get frozen as you ask them to make one more step because you've been working at a pace of 3 steps every 15 minutes along that last road. You have endless meeting with the schools. They insist they're doing all they can, but you struggle for evidence when they're in that full body lock mode. And the thing is, it really hurts pushing them into school. You dig deep for reasons and then come up with the law, but nothing else. You have a passion for learning, but you see the school destroying it. You know they're going to be out of lessons anyway, so why make them suffer?" It's going to be 2 different stories for every single family, isn't it?
It is, and I think if there's anything that I would say is just trust your gut and look after your child's mental health.
And that's the numbers.
The most important
that's
thing.
Such a beautiful way of phrasing it. Trust your gut and look after your child's mental health. But equally, every single parent listening to this will want their child to be in school. I don't think the parents who don't care whether their child is at school or not will be listening to this programme. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. It just seems unlikely, doesn't it? So how do we break these numbers down? What percentage are in situations like Christie's or Corpsey's, where you absolutely know that this is a case of can't, not won't? And how do you explain that difference to any sceptics? People who think that all can'ts are won'ts. There's a child who can't go to school and there's a child who won't go to school. We have all been the child who won't go to school. Jen took my tale of the homemade vomit to heart. She said, I hated school, third year juniors. I created so many stomach problems, they took my appendix out, James. I think you win. I'm glad to hear your story. I thought I was the Antichrist. So the difference between can't or won't, okay? Tim Humphries here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
35 is the time. Rita says, what about parents who aren't able to keep taking their children out of school because they have to go to work? You're going to be going to younger children now, aren't you? The problems this can cause with employers, stress all round. But if they are going to school, even though you'd rather they were at home, then they can go. I don't think anyone's picking me up on this distinction yet, but sometimes when I think things possess a beautiful simplicity, it turns out that I'm being a little bit crass. But I don't, at the moment, think there's anything wrong with asking what the difference is between a child who can't go to school, and a child who won't. And I'm not asking what's wrong with the child. I'm asking because it might be because the school is the way that it is that they can't. But that's can't, not won't. 0345 60 973. I was a Senko coordinator in a large mainstream high school until 2015, writes Chris. Dealt with many, many young people, difficulties in school attendance. I witnessed increased numbers and in many cases anxieties made worse or caused by the increased and singular focus on academic achievement, mostly but not entirely under Gove and Cummings. They reduced enjoyment in the curriculum, topped up with regular and more frequent testing. I could see the anxiety rising. That's really interesting. Is it that? Because is your child in the can't category or on the cusp between can't and won't because of what's happening at school? That's a valid answer to this question. But I'm also looking at the way to deal with the skeptics who think it's all bad parenting. You know, the kind of lazy tabloid approach to such matters that seems to typify almost every corner of UK journalism at the moment. Natalie's in Sheffield. Natalie, what would you like to say?
Yeah, sorry, so nervous.
What? Why? It's only me. Do you want a cup of tea?
I'm a big fan.
Do you want a cup of tea?
Fan.
What can I do to put you at your ease?
No, I'm all right.
Carry on.
I was phoning because I have 3 children and we all have different diagnoses. And my youngest loves school and her attendance is 100%.
Yeah.
My middle son, who has autism, I would be in the category of the lowest
attendance.
He's there about 50% of the week.
Right.
And I don't know, it's probably too easy of an answer, but I think the difference between can't and won't is if they won't, that's fairly normal. Like lots of people don't want to go to school some days.
Yes.
Can't is, my son will he hurts himself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And he does it in school. And they ring me and they send him home. Because they can't manage him.
Yeah.
He some days can't go and would soon. He has scars on his face.
Oh,
he's only 11, and he can't cope with the sound. He can't cope with the noise. He can't cope with the people.
And the self-harm provides a very brief respite from the unbearable business of his brain.
Yeah, and the school is brilliant. The school can't do enough for him. He is in the IR. He gets one-to-one teaching now, so he doesn't have to attend lessons. But some days that's not even enough.
No, of course.
To get him there. And I think if somebody was to think it was lazy parent, I have one who's got 100% attendance.
Yeah.
And she loves school. And this one, another one that doesn't. And my parenting is the same both ways. It's not.
Do you feel judged?
It's easy to say it's the parent.
Do you feel judged? You're not being judged by me. You know that, don't you, Natalie? But you do feel judged by others, by society even,
all the time.
Yeah.
People just... He has lots of... He won't eat different foods, and he sees dietitians, and I have people say, well, just... He'll eat when he's hungry, and they make me feel like I'm the one... I'm pandering, or I'm making him the way he is.
Yeah.
But I have 3 children, and they're all so different.
Yeah.
And the parenting is the same for all of them. A child that can't, it's a...
Well, you've given us a really stark example when attending is so torturous for them. And even on the good days, if that's the right phrase to use, on the days that he manages to stay in school, he's going to be masking on such a level that when he gets home, he's absolutely shattered, isn't he?
Oh, and I get... Well, this morning was a bad day, headbutt in the staircase, because he didn't want him. Although he's there, and I haven't had a phone call yet.
Okay.
But even on the good days, he does a reduced schedule. The school struggle to cope with him as much as he struggles to cope with the school.
I understand. And I'm going to ask you something that you may not have been asked before. But what's it like for you? What's it like for you?
I see a therapist.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted.
Of course.
I feel like I am torturing him every day, and that the right thing to do would not be to send him. But by not sending him, I'm holding him back from any little bit of education he might get, or I feel like I'm punishing him. And I think he feels like I'm punishing him. He feels at the minute like I'm making him go somewhere that makes him want to hurt himself.
Yeah.
And I do that to him. And people say homeschooling, but his needs are so complex, I'm not sure I'm capable of that.
Right.
As much as I would love to never have to do this with him again, he wouldn't learn for me. He didn't during lockdown. And I'm exhausted. And I hate when people would presume that it's laziness or bad. And I'm not saying in some cases it probably is different. But as an example of a child who loves school and is stood outside the gate 10 minutes before it opens, which is my youngest.
Yeah.
And then...
So it's not
a child.
Is it? I mean, it's really not helpful when the Education Secretary talks about a casual attitude, because that's what makes the headlines. That's what makes the headlines. She may have been more nuanced than that in her actual policy pronouncements, but Bridget Phillipson warns parents against a casual attitude to school attendance. The problem we have, Natalie, it's not your problem, it's mine, is that parents with a casual attitude to school attendance are highly unlikely to ring in and say, oh, guess what, James? I've got a really casual attitude to school attendance. It is going to be people who are going through the mangle, going through the mill every day like you are. And even now, when he's there, you're walking on eggshells, I imagine.
They phone me every day.
Yeah.
Every day I get a phone call, and it's either to say that he's tried to stab himself with a pencil, or that he's sat under a desk with his hood up, refusing to come out. And they're not allowed to physically take him from under a desk. I have to go into the school some days to collect him because he's refusing to move.
Yeah.
And that's he can't do it, and nothing I can do or they can do will change that. He just can't cope with that. Whereas won't is me when I didn't want to go because I didn't like certain lessons.
Won't's me making a bowl of homemade vomit, Natalie, isn't it? And chucking it all over the carpet and telling my mum I've been sick.
I think that's fairly normal. A child that doesn't want to go is fairly normal, because
that's the problem. Everybody. That's the problem with what we're reading and seeing now, is that the presumption is it's all can't. I beg your pardon, it's all won't. When in fact, I mean, how do we break it down? But it's going to be can't for so many more people than the likes of Bridget Phillipson and some of the journalists writing it up today are going to be capable of acknowledging. Do you get any help with him outside school?
Cams are great.
Oh, Cam's been good for you. That's good to hear. Okay.
Yeah,
and is there light? What's the light at the end of the tunnel?
Just when he's done. and I don't have to. I don't think he, because of his needs, I'm not sure he would ever want to carry on with colleges or anything. And I think...
But when he's no longer legally required to be at school, that will feel like a delivery for you, a deliverance.
Yeah.
Which is not ideal, is it? But I completely understand where you're coming from. You know you're doing a great job, don't you?
I don't know.
Well, take it from me. You're doing an incredible job. Everybody says so. I sound like Donald Trump now. Everybody says she's an amazing woman. She's an amazing woman. But I'm getting loads of messages coming in because a lot of people listening won't have even thought about some of the things that you said before. And for you, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, especially 5 days a week when you're supposed to be getting him into school. And the difference between can't or won't is crystal clear to them now, and it wasn't before. And the effort you put in and the work that you do and the burdens that you carry, you haven't mentioned at all. It's why I asked you what it was like for you, but they've come through in the course of this call in ways that I could never achieve in a 3-hour monologue, Natalie. I promise.
I do try. It's my job. All three of them are my world. And
it's clear.
And I do get... CAMs are amazing. The school is great. We do have an EHCP, which I know you've talked about previously, to anybody who wants one. It's 100% the world for difference with one.
And it's so hard to get, of course, and councils now spend a huge amount of time in court trying to resist awarding them. Another consequence of austerity that the fans of austerity never really talk about. But the requirements it places on the school are life-changing for the child. But even in the context of an EHCP, your lad is having some of those images you just conjured up will stay with a lot of people listening for a very, very long time. Thank you, Natalie. It's always the ones, come back a minute. It's always the ones who say they're nervous who end up being my best callers. You know that, don't you?
Oh, I'm shaking.
I don't know why. You were great. Really great.
No, I just would like people to know.
Hang in there,
it's not. Yeah.
Right, what you've described is love.
Oh, I love him. I love all of them.
I know you do. And it would be nice, perhaps, to see some of that reflected with a little more understanding of what the reality actually is. There is judgment for just existing as neurodivergent. One of my parent friends asked a question about accommodation for neurodivergent kids at an assembly meeting about a coming school trip, and I saw two people roll their eyes. And there it is. I'm more generous because I don't live with it. But that texter does. And so I would say they roll their eyes because they're ignorant. They roll their eyes because they haven't listened to people like Natalie. If they listened to someone like Natalie, they wouldn't be rolling their eyes. They'd understand why that boy is going to need questions to be asked about the accommodation that is going to be provided that most of us are not going to be asking about our children. But of course, I don't know. Maybe one of them would end up rolling their eyes. I can't split two people into a 52-48 divide, but it's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. A lot of love coming in for Natalie. I hope you're still listening. I turn your attention next to the 3-year anniversary today of the illegal invasion of Ukraine. Those words have assumed a different resonance, haven't they, since Donald Trump started telling lies about Volodymyr Zelensky? It was like an unchallenged language, the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the attempted occupation, the assault upon Kyiv, all now being denied. 2 members of Donald Trump's cabinet, or 2 senior members of his administration, have refused to answer the question of whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine. That odd bloke he's made Secretary of State for Defence claimed it was far too complicated to be able to answer in such clear terms. It makes the mind boggle. Happily, some writers are there to unboggle our minds, and at their forefront is the foreign correspondent and columnist Ian Birrell, who I think was in Kyiv on the day that the missiles started striking, and who joins me now live from Boston. Ian, it's an article you've written for The Eye that drew my eye this morning. Ukraine is the defining issue of our age, and at risk of a spoiler, I'll cut to the final paragraph. I cling to faith in the wondrous optimism of the American spirit, but fear the betrayal of Ukraine might just be the opening chapter in a dark story for democracy. What's going on?
Well, it's kind of hard to fathom when you see the speed of events. Clearly, America under Donald Trump is betraying Ukraine. The fact that he's invited Putin into the peace talks is fine to do that, but to do it without Ukraine, to do it in the language they're using, to then turn on Zelensky like he's doing, and to accuse Zelensky of an elected president of being a dictator, It's just, as you say, the mind boggles at all these different incidents going on. So on the one hand, you've got that. On the other hand, we know that Russia is basically at war with the West, whether we like it or not. We know there's all these cyber attacks going on. There's the cable cuttings in the Baltic Sea. There's the disinformation designed to undermine different societies, which I've seen brings Slovakia back into the Putin's arms. I saw the election there. You see how powerful disinformation is. They've already got Hungary on side. You're seeing the same sort of thing beginning to occur, and the Czech Republic is looking alarming what may happen there. So you're seeing this, and Austria, of course, also just gave the far right, a pro-Russian far right party, a majority, made it the biggest party at the last election. So we're seeing this insidious creep of the far right, pro-Russian far right, and the pro-Russian far left, doing very well across Europe. And this is all part of the strategy. So you've got this dual thing going on, where on the one hand, you've got the Russian disinformation and sabotage going, impacting on Europe and indeed on Britain. We shouldn't be deluded that it's hitting Britain also. And on the other side, you've now got, unbelievably, an American president who is basically a patsy of Putin.
You say unbelievably. Has it taken you by surprise? I can't quite imagine anybody thought it would be this bad this quickly.
No, I mean, I think it's predictable in many ways because he made it clear where he stood. You know, he made it clear where he stood, and you look at the people he surrounded himself and what they've been saying.
Yes.
So on one level, it's very predictable what he's doing, but the speed with which it's happening and the degree to which it's happening, I don't think anyone expected him to turn on Zelensky in the way he had and call him a dictator and demand that they hold elections and all this, which is total Russian lines. Let's not forget that Britain didn't hold elections in the Second World War, and yet the hero of that fight for freedom, Winston Churchill, has just had his bust put back in the Oval Office.
Yeah. I wonder if it's fair to ask you to pinpoint other particular flashpoints. I suppose J.D. Vance's speech was the earliest indication of an unprecedented shift in how these things are normally conducted. A speech about abortion clinics. I mean, untruths and exaggerations about abortion clinics in this country, well, no mention made of the threat posed to the Western order by Russia or China. And that was presumably a pretty massive moment as well.
Yeah, well, to see the way that they say that the alleged attack on free speech in the West is worse than Russia's attack is just, you know, again, it's unbelievable. And then let's not forget, he then went and met with the AfD, which is a pro-Russian far-right party, which German intelligence have designated a threat. And he then went and met with them and didn't meet with the elected leaders of the German government. Again, you know, every single step is pure what Putin would dream of having happen.
And yet, no one's got the Rosetta Stone, have they? I mean, we can talk about Trump's boundless vanity, and as you pick up upon the fact that Zelensky being one of the few people to actually tell the truth about the disinformation bubble that he inhabits. J.D. Vance presumably, not that long ago, was worried that Donald Trump might turn out to be America's Hitler, is now in lockstep with the misinformation. But when I talk about a Rosetta Stone, I mean, people wonder whether or not Putin has something on Trump, which is conspiracy theory territory. But why, in your view, is Trump adopting this pro-Kremlin position? If you're the leader of an Eastern European country, there's a sort of, if logic's not quite the right word, there's a rationale to it, isn't there, in terms of protecting your own power base? Trump doesn't need Putin.
No, except let's not forget that it's Eastern European countries also which are far more resolute on this. You look at what Lithuania is doing, even against China. Little Lithuania is standing up to China. You look at Estonia, you look at Denmark, you look at Poland in particular. So, you know, I don't see the logic there. They actually understand the threat from Moscow because they've suffered it. They've suffered the repression. We don't really know what drives Trump, except for the fact that he's got this vast ego and he sees the world through himself. And if you flatter him, that can work. Putin, of course, is a trained KGB officer. He's got the entire machinery of the Russian security system behind him there. I can only assume that they're very good at playing him, and Trump loves strongmen. He loves strong dictators. We've seen that all the time. That ludicrous thing where in the first term where he went off to and thought he could solve the problems of the Korean War by hanging out with someone who just, you know, made him look a buffoon again with that situation. You can play him. That's the thing, and that's the one hope, is that can Macron, can Starmer this week, can they begin to play him and flatter him? And it's a horrible thing they have to do, but can they begin to drag him back into a slightly saner view and slightly away from Russians' orbit?
So flatter him back the other way by talking perhaps about how weak he might look if he doesn't stand up to Putin.
Well, I know there's been a debate in Downing Street, is the best way to go forward with him? And there's been a big debate in Ukraine, which is the best way to play him to say you're going to look weak if we fall, or you're going to look, you're a strong guy and we're being strong, and you've got to stand with the strong guys against the weak Russia. And there was a very big debate in Ukraine as to what was the best way to do it. And Zelensky had flattered him really well. He'd done a very good job. So again, the speed and the velocity with which Trump turned on him is a really worrying sign for every other, world leader. And I don't even, it's easy to be critical of politicians, and I am, and you are, but the idea of having to go and deal with this guy when, you're trying to protect your own country's interests, he probably makes you feel sick to the pit of your stomach, and yet you've got to go and flatter him and tell him he's great and offer him, baubles like speaking to Parliament
and you have to. I think it's important to stress that point. You can't not, because that would be to defy the national interest for a leader of France or the UK.
Exactly, and make you feel better by saying what you think, and it would make a lot of people in your own party feel better, but ultimately you've got to do what's right for the country. And I don't envy Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron and the other leaders who have to do this.
Ian, thank you. I said you'd unboggle our minds. Thank you for trying. I'm mildly less boggled than I was before, but certainly no more upbeat. Ian Birrell there, whose article in today's newspaper, Ukraine is defining issue of our age. Putin's expectations of weakness are borne out by a patsy president is required reading. And that is it for me for today. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. You got your work cut out for the Germany phone-in, but I presume Natalie will be romping onto the best of reel today. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.